Caddis Maximus here, this time with a review of the GM PowerTorque double quarter-inch, they call it a dual universal Speedy driver, GM 4359. I went through the pain and embarrassment of buying this for 12 bucks, so you don't have to. Really, the whole purpose I bought this was for this quarter-inch flex breaker bar. It's essentially quarter-inch hex flex breaker bar, just like a traditional quarter-inch breaker bar. What they've tried to do here is include a quick release, or a locking, quick release quarter-inch hex on one end, and then a quarter-inch universal socket on the other end. I guess being the idea that it's kind of like a spinner handle with a universal joint on it. It's really gimmicky, and once again, I basically bought it for this. The reason it's gimmicky is because there's just so much flexing here that when you're trying to break fasteners, it will want to try to rock and get in these kind of weird, awkward situations. It's going to put a lot of stress on actually some pretty small and thin screws. The biggest concern is if we look closely here, it's the cross-section of metal at the fork. It's not very wide. I mean, it is. Here's a number 2 Phillips for comparison, and there's a tip of the Phillips. There's just not a lot of metal in the corner. There's far less material in these two corners here than there is in a quarter-inch square, and this thing will break under a lot of torque. I'm sure it will break right there. There's just so little metal, and then there's a hard squared corner right there as a stress riser. So I thought it was cheesy. They should have just made it more of just a normal flex handle, and maybe made it a little heavier duty on that end. On the quarter-inch hex side, it's actually pretty small as well, but that was the whole purpose. Why I addictively bought it was because this is a pretty unique tool in that respect. It's very rare. There's these quarter-inch hex ratchets and etc., but this is actually just a traditional spinner handle breaker bar just for quarter-inch. So inside here, we can just see this little shiny dot. Only one ball bearing retention, and they didn't even include a magnet, which seems really strange. It's also not a push auto lock. You actually have to lift the collar up and manually lock it. So they should have put in at least 2 ball bearings. They are running in the corners so that they sit in these divots. So they'll both lock 1-inch bits, as well as being compatible with anything longer with the traditional quick release cutout. So I did appreciate that, but they should have made it 1 push insertion, include the magnet, and had a second ball bearing. So that's why I'm even a bit disappointed in myself. But I did want to add this tool to my little quarter-inch selection. I mean, but as far as, you know, usability and strength, the other real issue is the width. If we take, say, a constant velocity impact quarter-inch universal joint, we can see that the distance across the head of that fork there is almost, or is basically as wide, maybe just a little bit narrower than a quarter-inch, let me move that over there, impact universal joint. But you don't get any of the strength, and you don't get the usefulness of being a constant velocity, so you don't get any binding, and it makes these type of universal joints are just fantastic. So that's why I was going to generally recommend against it, because I think it's going to break on you, and this thing's going to end up being more frustration than it's worth, unless you're actually into the aspect of it of being a quarter-inch hex breaker bar. And I'm not going to intentionally break it, but I'm pretty sure I could use this little Protos breaker bar and just in my hand be able to snap this off. I mean, this is some of the thinnest cross sections of metal I've ever seen on a hand tool that's supposed to be, you know, professional grade, quote unquote. So anyway, in light of that, that's essentially what I'm going to do, so much so that I'm not even going to keep the screw in here. The screw is also kind of missized, I found. It's supposed to be a 2mm, but it's just a little bit oversized, and just none of the wrenches really wanted to work quite properly in it. Otherwise, it's not too bad. I guess I shouldn't criticize the screws too heavily. They're not that thin, but they are pretty darn small. And voila, so I just took that little quarter-inch head off. I'll find some place to end up using this. Sorry for some of those cuts there. But I just put the screw back in there, and so kind of a neat little tool. And for really what I did is I paid $12 for this, and it really just totally not worth it. But I do like the idea of collecting these interesting quarter-inch hex tools. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody watching and subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Till next time, Catus Maximus out.